C.S. Lewis, a number of years ago, wrote a series of letters to a newspaper. And in those series of letters, he made himself to be Screwtape, who was a lead devil. And Screwtape was writing the letter, these series of letters, was to his nephew or apprentice, Wormwood. And my men's group and I plowed through this set of letters. C.S. Lewis is I would say, for me, is not an easy man to understand because of the thick Old English that he used, and it was tough. But we found an actor by the name of John Cleese, who used to appear actually on Saturday Night Live. He was a British actor, and he would read these letters out loud, and so we'd listen to it, and then you could really catch the message of it all. So Screwtape is writing Wormwood, teaching him how to tempt human beings, how to make them fall, how to pull them away from his enemy. Screwtape always refers to God as the enemy. And one of his pieces of advice is this: keep them anxious. Make sure they are worried about something. We don't think of worry or we don't think of anxiousness as being sin. But it's interesting that he believes that just having us worry and having us be anxious prones itself for us to be separated from the enemy. In other words, God. In 1978, John Paul II was elected Pope, and the very first words out of his mouth as he stood on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica were, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid." Why is it that similar song, "Be Not Afraid," is chosen so often by families for funerals? Do all of these things about fear somehow have a hook that gets into us because we all experience it very well? We all experience worry, fear, anxiety. We can hear Jesus when he says to us, "Be not afraid," and we say, sure. Easier said than done, isn't it? Thomas Hughes, who's an author, wrote a book back in 1857. And it's still a classic today, I understand, because it's still in print. And it's a story about a boy going off to a boarding school in England and his experiences while he's there. It's called Tom Brown's Boys. And in it, this experience takes place, one of many. And the boys seem to be separated into kind of dorm rooms with about a dozen or so boys in each room. And Tom found himself to be kind of a leader in that group. People kind of looked up to him. He had some influence over the other boys. Along comes a young boy by the name of Arthur, a young kid, younger than the others and much smaller than the others. And the others start to kind of antagonize him and make fun of him and mock him and all those sort of things. And Tom kind of sticks up for him, kind of takes him under his arm and protects him a little bit. Well, Arthur gets ready for bed, and he goes to when he gets finished in the bathroom, he comes out, and the very first thing he does is he kneels down by his bed to say his prayers. And all the other boys launch off in an attack on him. One of them even throws a shoe across the room. The shoe misses the boy, but it actually hits Tom. And Tom realizes what's going on. He realizes that Arthur had knelt down to pray, and he realizes what these other boys are doing to him. And it began a kind of an examination of conscience on his part. This examination of conscience opens up his heart to the fact that he had promised his mother when he had left home that he would kneel and say his prayers every day. So I'm going to read to you an extended section of that storybook about his thinking. So it starts off, "Poor Tom," talking about himself. "The first and bitterest feeling which was like to break his heart was the sense of his own cowardice. The vice of all the others which he loathed was brought in and burned in on his own soul. He had lied to his mother, to his conscience, and to his God. How could he bear it? And then the poor little weak boy, whom he pitied and almost scorned for his weakness, had done that which he, braggart as he was, dared not do. The first dawn of comfort came to him in swearing to himself that he would stand by that boy through thick and thin and cheer him and help him and bear his burdens for the good deed done that night. Then he resolved to write home the next day and tell his mother all, and what a coward her son had been. And then peace came to him as he resolved, lastly, to bear his testimony next morning. The morning would be harder than the night to begin with, but he felt that he could not afford to let one chance slip. Several times he faltered, for the devil showed him first all his old friends calling him saint and square toes and a dozen hard names, and whispered to him that his motives would be misunderstood and he would only be left alone with the new boy. Whereas it was his duty to keep all means of influence that he might do good to the largest number. And then came the more subtle temptation. Shall I not be showing myself braver than others by doing this? Have I any right to begin it now? Ought I not rather to pray in my own study, letting other boys know that I do so and trying to lead them to it, while in public at least I should go on as I have done? However, his good angel was strong, too strong that night, and he turned on his side and slept, tired of trying to reason, but resolved to follow the impulse that had been so strong and in which he had found peace. Next morning he was up and washed and dressed, and all but his jacket and waistcoat, just as the 10 minutes bell began to ring. And then in the face of the whole room knelt down to pray. Not 5 words could he say. The bell mocked him. He was listening for every whisper in the room. What were they all thinking of him? He was ashamed to go on kneeling and ashamed to rise from his knees. At last, as it were, from his inmost heart, a small, still voice seemed to breathe forth the words of the publican, God be merciful to me, a sinner. He repeated them over and over, clinging to them as for his life, and rose from his knees, comforted and humbled, and ready to face the whole world. It was not needed. 2 other boys besides Arthur had already followed his example, and he went down to the great school with a glimmering of another lesson in his heart, the lesson that he who has conquered his own coward spirit has conquered the whole outward world. Fear of rejection. All of us have it at one way or another. The young, we can see it so clearly, but the adults have it as well. Like the simple story of Tom, we can easily make excuses for why we should not be public with our faith. Because speaking up with the faith means that we will feel the eyes of rejection by some. We will feel dumb ourselves because who are we to think these things and do these things? And we perhaps will feel our own sins weighing us down. We are not perfect. How dare we think others could see something good in this action? But with a little pause and a little prayer, perhaps we can do those things that show forth our Christian faith by word and example. Do not fear. We will find the right words. The Lord will give them to us. I think about the mocking phrase given to Jesus while he was on the cross. They said to him, he saved others. Let him save himself. If you're so good, save yourself. You can see that kind of rejection coming at us as well, as we seek to live our faith courageously in this world which is no longer Christian. Jesus was warning his apostles about the experience of opposition that they will experience just as he has. But he reminded them too that he would be with them. He's not going to abandon them. There are 3 reasons why it's important for us to be courageous and to lay our fears aside. The first one is that in our fidelity, we will be vindicated. It may not come right away, but in the end, it will show itself, that our faithfulness will be vindicated. Secondly, the people who criticize or don't agree have limited power. They cannot do anything to our soul. Only our sin can do that. That is what separates us from our destiny and from God himself. But no one can touch soul. No one can touch our soul. And finally, we are very important to God. As it says in the gospel today, one little sparrow is something God even worries about. If God worries about one little sparrow, how much more does he worry about us? To be with us and to help us so that we can stand up to the fears. There are so many fears today that we have to deal with. So much lack of certainty, so many things that are changing, issues around health, issues around prejudice, issues around civil order. All these things, can bottle up inside of us as a kind of fear. But the Lord wants us to know, you have conquered the world. Be faithful. Do not fear.